Chapter 15, Shadow Slave, Prepare for Appraisal. Sonny found himself in a space between dream and reality. It was an endless black void illuminated by a myriad of stars. Between those stars, countless strings of silver light were woven into a beautiful and inconceivably complex net, forming various nexuses and constellations. It was truly breathtaking. Somehow, Sonny understood that he was seeing the inner workings of the nightmare spell. He also couldn't help but think that it looked a lot like the celestial equivalent of a neural network. If so, was the spell alive? This was a question that countless people had been asking themselves for the past few decades. The best answer they had come up with was that there was no way to know. The spell was neither alive nor dead, neither sentient nor mindless. It was more of a function than a creature, but Sonny was in no mood to ponder philosophical questions. He was eagerly awaiting his boon. The spell was still appraising his performance. However, the first reward had nothing to do with it. You have received a memory. Puppeteer's Shroud. Yes. Sonny felt incredibly elated. He was almost ready to do a happy dance. That memory belonged to Mountain King, who was an awakened tyrant, which meant that the memory itself was of the awakened rank. Getting it was a stroke of incredible luck. There were 7 ranks to everything in the spell. These ranks were in order of growing power: dormant, awakened, ascended, transcendent, supreme, sacred, and divine, with the exclusion of nightmare creatures who were ranked as dormant, awakened, fallen, corrupted, great, cursed, and unholy. From the spell's point of view, Sonny was a dormant human. Having a memory of a higher rank than his own soul core would be of great help once he enters the dream realm. The power gap between different ranks simply could not be overestimated. He wanted to take a look at the Puppeteer's Shroud, but there was no more time. The spell was done with its appraisal. Here in the void, its voice didn't sound subtle and familiar anymore. Rather, it seemed like the universe itself was speaking. Sonny held his breath, listening. Aspirant, your trial is over. A nameless slave ascended the Black Mountain. Both heroes and monsters fell by his hand. Unbroken, he entered the ruined temple of a long-forgotten god and spilled his blood on the sacred altar. The gods were dead, and yet they listened. You have defeated a dormant beast, Mountain King's larva. You have defeated 3 dormant humans, names unknown. You have defeated an awakened human, Oro of the 9. You have defeated an awakened tyrant, Mountain King. You have received the Shadow God's blessing. You have achieved the impossible. Final appraisal, glorious. Your treachery truly knows no bounds. That final part was not really necessary as far as Sonny was concerned, but he was still pretty satisfied with the praise from the spell. He felt like his chances of evolving his aspect to an awakened or even ascended one were pretty high. His overall power was still dependent on the rank of his soul core, which would remain dormant until much later, but the rank of the aspect itself would do wonders for his overall potential. Dreamer Sunless, receive your boon. He was an aspirant no more. Sonny grinned. You have been bestowed a true name, lost from light. His jaw dropped. A true name. He had received a true name. Never in his wildest dreams did Sonny dream of becoming one of the chosen few to accomplish such feat, and in his very first nightmare to boot. Not even all of the saints could boast of having one. He was an elite now, a bona fide cream of the crop. He was going to be rich, but the rewards kept coming. Your aspect is ready to evolve. Evolve aspect. What kind of a question is that? Sonny crossed his fingers and said, yes. Dormant aspect temple, slave is evolving. New aspect acquired, aspect rank, divine. Sonny fell over, aspect name, shadow slave. Divine, it's divine. Sonny was standing on his knees, stupefied. The shock was so great that for a second there he lost all control over his limbs and fell. It said divine, right? He raised a trembling hand and rubbed his eyes, making sure that he was awake. Or rather conscious, since technically he was still sleeping in the underground vault of the police station. Confused by all this terminology, Sonny silently summoned the runes and found the lines describing his aspect. Aspect, shadow slave. Aspect rank, divine. Aspect description. You are a miraculous shadow left behind by a dead god. As a divine shadow, you possess plenty of strange and wondrous powers. However, your existence is empty and lonesome. You mourn the passing of your former master and long to find a new one. Innate ability, shadow bond. Ability description. Find a worthy master and let them know your true name. Once they recite it out loud, you will be bound to their will, unable to disobey any command. It is improper for a shadow, let alone a divine one, to walk around without a master. That was a lot to digest. First of all, Sonny felt his heart beating faster. He heard it right. All the suffering and horror he had experienced in the first nightmare paid off in the end. A divine aspect. He had received a divine aspect. Anything above awakened was rare and immensely valuable. People with ascended aspects were rare enough to be fought over by various factions. The factions themselves were built around singular powerhouses with transcendent or supreme aspects, and he had never ever heard of anyone acquiring a divine one. Never. Anything with the divine prefix was so hard to find that it mostly lived in the realm of myths and legends. After all, the human race had not reached that high yet. It was only slightly more than a decade since humans managed to finally conquer the third nightmare and receive the ability to evolve their cores to transcendent rank. As transcendents, or saints, as they were called in the real world, powerful awakened ruled over the dream realm. But even they did not dare to face nightmare creatures of higher ranks. Subsequently, there were not a lot of memories and echoes of supreme rank around, let alone sacred or divine. The same went for aspects, and yet Sonny just got one. He grinned, driven half mad by joy and arrogance. However, his jubilation was a little muddied. After all, there was that weird innate ability. Of course, he had no intention of becoming someone's magical slave, with no free will of his own. To hell with that. But it wasn't that bad. All he had to do to avoid that fate was to conceal his true name. No one except for him could see his status. That meant that Sonny just had to keep his mouth shut, and no one will know that he even had one. It meant giving up on all the benefits that someone who was bestowed a true name after the first nightmare was entitled to, but it all paled in comparison with a divine aspect. Not a problem, Sonny thought with a smirk. If the spell had the ability to laugh, it would surely do so after hearing his thoughts. However, it didn't. Instead, it began to speak again. The first seal is broken. Awakening dormant powers. Chapter 16. Rebirth. Sonny felt something waking up inside of him. With a startled cry, he clutched his chest and stared into the darkness, trying to understand what was happening. The feeling was not painful or unpleasant, yet it was like nothing he had ever experienced. It was as though his soul was being shaken awake, infused with strange new energy. However, that energy did not come from some outside source. Rather, it was coming from within, as though it had always been there, sleeping. The energy filled every fiber of his being. Sonny felt his emotions becoming clearer and sharper. Then his body began to change too. He felt as though a miniature star was burning in the center of his chest. Waves of heat were radiating from it, slowly reaching his stomach and shoulders, then his arms and legs, then his hands and feet. Under that heat, his bones, muscles, organs, and blood vessels were being rebuilt and revitalized. Sonny felt like he was being reborn. He was becoming stronger, faster, healthier. It was euphoric. With each second, his transformation was becoming more profound. New confidence settled in Sonny's heart. He was not a weak, frail street kid anymore. He was not as vulnerable against anyone who would wish to bully him as he was in the past. With his powers awakened and his will tempered by the horrors of the first nightmare, he was now someone you would not want to cross. After some time had passed, the star burning in his chest finally cooled down. The heat was replaced with a soothing coldness. That coldness washed over Sonny's body, taking away all the aches and discomforts that had been accumulated there over the years. Then it moved up, reaching his brain and, finally, his eyes. His vision strangely doubled. He could still see the void populated by an endless pattern of stars. But he could also see something different. A silent, calm, dark sea illuminated by a lonely black sun. From his previous knowledge, Sonny knew that this was his so-called Sea of Soul. But he also knew that it was supposed to look quite different. For starters, it was supposed to be much more lively. The star hanging above, the visual representation of his soul core, was supposed to be burning with bright light, filling the soul sea with a warm, blinding shining. However, Sonny's soul was dark and lightless. That's strange. He took a look at the black sun. At a closer examination, it actually turned out to be transparent. It's just that with no other major source of light around, the star had appeared to be as dark as its surroundings. Also, no one was supposed to be here except for him. It was his soul, after all. But Sonny had a nagging feeling that somewhere just beyond the periphery of his vision, hidden in the darkness, shapeless forms were constantly moving. No matter how he turned his head, he couldn't catch a clear glimpse of them. And yet the feeling would not go away. Not wishing to waste any more time on this right now, Sonny turned back to the black sun and finally spotted two spheres of light orbiting around it, as though caught in the soul core's gravity well. A subtle smile appeared on his face. These were his memories, Silver Bell and Pupetta's Shroud. Later, there would be dozens of such spheres here. If he was lucky, he would even acquire an echo or two. The spell's voice suddenly pulled him out of the Sea of Soul. Awakening Aspect Ability. This is it. The moment of truth, Sonny thought. Divine aspect or not, his immediate future still depended on the first aspect ability he would receive. His role in the dream realm would be based on its characteristics. If it was a combat ability, he would be most useful on the front lines of the bloody battles against the nightmare creatures. If it was tied to sorcery, he would likely become a powerful but fragile ranged fighter. If it was something having to do with utility, he would be a vitally important part of the behind-the-scenes workings of the dream realm. Utility abilities were also extremely valued in the real world, where Awakened performed many tasks that kept it going. If he was lucky, he could even become a healer. Healers were very rare, and as such, sought-after specialists. Aspect ability acquired. Aspect ability name, Shadow Control. Sonny hurriedly summoned the runes. He wanted to go to the description of his new ability right away, but then decided to give his overall information a look first. Name, Sunless. True name, Lost from Light. Rank, Dreamer, Shadow Core. Dormant, Shadow Fragments. 12 out of 1,000. What? What is that? Where the rank of his soul core was supposed to be written, a mysterious shadow core appeared instead. Sonny looked at it, blinking. He had never heard of anyone having a different kind of core before. Was he that unique? This enigmatic shadow core would certainly explain why his Sea of Soul looked so strange. And also, he moved his eyes down, noticing the shadow fragments counter. Usually, there was supposed to be an indicator of the number of soul shards consumed. However, it was nowhere to be seen. Do I Do I actually have a completely different progression path than all awakened? The idea was as exciting as it was frightening. Not having to fight for resources with anybody else was an incredible advantage. Most of the human society in the dream realm was built around the acquisition of soul shards. If he had no need to gather them to evolve, not only would he be able to become more powerful with incredible speed, he would also be completely self-sufficient. On the other hand, he had no idea how to acquire these shadow fragments. However, he had gotten 12 of them somehow already. So whatever it was that he had to do, he had already done it in the first nightmare. I'll have to explore this carefully. Satisfied with this decision, Sunny continued to study the runes. Memories, silver bell, puppeteer's shroud, echoes, attributes, fated, mark of divinity, child of shadows, aspect, shadow slave, aspect rank, divine, aspect abilities, shadow control, aspect ability, description, your shadow is more independent than most. It is an invaluable helper. What is that supposed to mean? Sunny held his breath and began to read the description again, but at that moment a new set of runes appeared just below it. Simultaneously, the spell's voice resounded in the black void. All power has a price. You have received a flaw. Your flaw is... Sunny read the runes, and his eyes widened in horror. Oh no, 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 no. Chapter 17. 3 simple words. He closed his eyes, then opened them again, hoping that the runes would disappear. Please, be gone, please! But the runes were still there, shining slightly, as though mocking him. Flaw. Clear conscience. Flaw. Description. You cannot lie. Sunny stared at these 3 simple words, feeling like there was a bottomless abyss opening right beneath his feet. The spell, which was usually frivolous with its descriptions, decided to be straight and on point this time. There were only 3 words. They left him no room to maneuver. Can't lie. I can't lie. Me. How am I supposed to live if I can't lie? Sunny's very survival was predicated on his ability to deceive and outsmart other people. Even the spell itself congratulated him on his treachery. Without the ability to lie, he wouldn't be able to achieve anything. Not to mention, his heart suddenly felt as though it was about to stop. If he could only tell the truth, how was he supposed to hide his true name? Wouldn't anyone be able to turn him into an obedient slave by simply asking a couple of innocent questions? Shh! Sunny was about to scream and curse, but at that moment the spell spoke again. Wake up, lost from light. The black void spun and disappeared. Sunny opened his eyes. The armored ceiling of the police station's vault hung above him. No one would call its aesthetics beautiful, but to him it was the most majestic sight. Only now did he realize how much he had missed the real world. It was safe and familiar. There were no monsters or slavers, well, at least officially. There was no constant fear of torturous death. It was home. In addition, Sunny felt incredible. The cold that had crept deep into his bones during the nightmare was gone, taking with it all the pain that his wounded body had been enduring day after day. His feet and wrists were not in agony. His back had forgotten the bite of the whip, and he could even breathe without feeling the sharp edges of his broken ribs cutting deeper and deeper into his lungs. What a blessing! The sudden disappearance of pain, coupled with the new vitality that permeated his body, almost made Sunny cry. I really survived. He slowly looked down and then froze, breathless. On a cheap plastic chair placed beside his reinforced medical bed sat the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She had short, raven-black hair and icy blue eyes. Her flawless skin was smooth, supple, and as white as snow. Actually, this was Sunny's first time meeting someone as pale as he himself was. However, while Sunny's pallor looked strange and unhealthy, the beautiful stranger was nothing short of striking. The woman seemed to be in her late 20s. She was wearing a dark blue uniform with silver epaulets and black leather boots. The jacket of her uniform was casually unbuttoned, revealing a black tank top beneath. Currently, she was stretching her arms above her head, clearly bored and sleepy. The gesture forced the thin fabric to tighten, provocatively accentuating her full breasts. Mesmerized, Sunny almost missed the fact that there was a shoulder insignia on the woman's left sleeve. There were 3 stars on it. 3 stars, huh? He thought, distracted. 3 stars means an ascended, huh? Yeah. Wait, an ascended? But before Sunny could fully digest the meaning of this word, he realized that the woman was staring at him too. "What are you looking at?" she said, not a gram of humor in her voice. Sunny blinked a couple of times, embarrassed, and quickly came up with an excuse. Then he opened his mouth and answered, "Your breasts." A second later, his eye widened in absolute horror. Because he wasn't planning to say those words at all, his mouth moved on its own. A wave of terror suddenly drowned his mind. The woman slowly smiled with a dangerous gleam in her eyes. Then, without any warning, she moved her hand and slapped Sunny across the face. Sunny's whole body was turned around. If it wasn't for the restraints holding him in place, he would have probably flown off the bed. For a moment, he even saw stars, but it could still be considered getting off lightly. An ascended. The woman was an ascended. She could have torn his head clean off with a flick of a finger. Why did he have to offend someone so powerful, of all people? Meanwhile, the woman cleared her throat and crossed her arms. "Are you awake now?" Sunny held his numb cheek and carefully nodded. "Good. Let me give you a piece of advice. Don't just say anything that comes to your mind, especially to girls. It's not like you haven't seen a girl before, right? Say thank you." "I definitely will not," Sunny thought. But instead his mouth moved on its own and he said, "I've seen plenty, but no one as beautiful as you." Then he flinched back, his face as red as a lobster. The woman stared at him for a few seconds and then burst into laughter. "I see you haven't met a lot of awakened then. By awakened standards, I'm below average." Sunny glanced at her with doubt. The woman shook her head. "As your soul core develops, the body gets rid of all its imperfections, so it's hard to find an unattractive awakened, especially among the stronger ones. Live long enough, and you might just become a flower boy yourself." Then she gave him a thorough look and added, "Well, maybe. In any case, since you're awake, welcome back to the land of the living. Congratulations on surviving your first nightmare, Sleeper Sunless." Sleeper Sunless. That was how people would address him now, at least in the short span of days until the winter solstice. After that, he would either return from the dream realm as an awakened, or not return at all. It felt strange to have a title put before his name. In the past, Sunny was rarely even addressed by name. People mostly called him things like boy, punk, brat, or hey, you. But now he even had a title, Sleeper Sunless. Actually, the correct term was dreamer, but humans had their own set of words for those infected by the nightmare spell. Carriers who had just finished their first nightmare were called sleepers because of how they interacted with the spell. Basically, once his spirit enters the spell, his body was going to fall into slumber. That slumber would continue for days, weeks, or even months, however long it takes him to escape the dream realm. Hence the term sleeper. Once he escapes and becomes an awakened, he would live his life normally during the day and return to the dream realm every time he falls asleep. The awakened were called the same by the spell and the humans. That word was also sometimes used as a general term for all carriers. Then, if he were to decide to enter a second nightmare and manage to survive, he would become an ascended. People called them masters. Masters could enter and exit the dream realm as they wished. Some even chose to never come back there at all. More than that, they traveled between the worlds physically, not just in spirit. And then, above the masters, there were saints, those who had conquered the third nightmare and earned the right to call themselves transcendent. They were as powerful as demigods, and even more rare. Not only could they travel between the real world and the dream realm, but they could also take others with them. But coming back to masters, the beautiful woman stood up and approached the reinforced medical bed. With practiced moves, she began to undo the restraint, holding Sunny in place. I am Ascended Jet. You can call me Master Jet. These past 3 days, I was on watch duty due to your nightmare. Right. Before I fell asleep, the policeman told me that an awakened would arrive in a few hours to monitor my condition, to kill the nightmare creature if I die and let it through. Sonny was unwilling to open his mouth, terrified that all sorts of truths would come spilling out. But there were things he simply had to know. Master Jet, I have a question. Go on. Why would a master be put on watch duty? Isn't it below your pay grade? Jet gave him a dark look. You're smarter than you seem. Recently, there was a lot of gates opening in this sector. Most of the local awakened are either wounded or occupied with the cleanup, or dead. It's always like that close to the winter solstice. She opened the final restraint and took a step back. Plus, there's not a lot of awakened who, like me, directly work for the government. It's by far the least lucrative or glorious career one of us can choose. Would you abandon wealth and fame to work abysmal hours and risk your life, fueled only by altruism and sense of duty? Sonny wanted to say something flattering. Instead, he looked Master Jet right in the eyes and smirked. Of course not. I'm not an idiot. Damn this damn flaw. Damn! She stared at him with a humorless expression. Sonny thought that he was going to get slapped again. But instead, Jet smiled. See, I was right. You really are smart. Chapter 18, Absence of Light. Sonny was enjoying a hot shower. After their short conversation, Master Jet had sent him to clean himself, saying that he reeked of nightmare. The unnatural slumber of the spell would slow down the body's metabolism, and the medical apparatus he had been strapped into was supposed to take care of the rest. But he was still asleep for 3 whole days. Even if only psychological, the scent of bloodshed and despair lingered around him. Ah, I'm in heaven, Sonny thought, willing himself to temporarily forget about the looming disaster of the flaw. He was alone in the police station's showers, relaxing under the streams of hot water. After a bit of time had passed, Sonny reluctantly turned the tap off and walked over to the towel rack. Coincidentally, he saw himself reflecting in the mirror. The changes in his physique were subtle, but noticeable. His pale skin seemed a little healthier, his muscles a bit more pronounced. He looked slender and lean instead of emaciated and frail, as he did before. There was a slight luster to his dark hair and a shine to his eyes. However, he was still rather diminutive. Not exactly a picture of masculine handsomeness, to say the least. Flower boy, huh? Sonny thought, full of bitterness. Then he suddenly froze, noticing something strange. As he was looking at himself in the mirror, the reflection of his shadow seemed to move. It was as though the shadow lowered its head and quietly face-palmed. Sonny quickly turned around, piercing his shadow with a nervous look. However, everything seemed normal. The shadow was doing exactly what it was supposed to do, repeating his every motion. Read novel. Full.me. I clearly saw you move, he said, feeling a bit strange. You have just moved on your own, right? Sonny glared at the shadow, which obediently glared back. Did you move or not? The shadow enthusiastically shook its head. What the? What do you mean, no? You've just moved your head. Do you think I'm a fool? The shadow seemed to think for a bit and then shrugged. Sonny was left with his mouth agape. Your shadow is more independent than most. It is an invaluable helper, he muttered finally. Right. This was how the spell had described his aspect ability. But what exactly could his shadow do? He decided to experiment a little. Hey, you, tell me what you can do. The shadow was silent and motionless. Right, it doesn't have vocal cords. As though that made any sense. Shadows were not supposed to have muscles either, and yet it knew how to move. Show me? No reaction. It seems the shadow was content pretending to be an ordinary, lifeless blob of darkness. Sunny sighed. I'm doing this wrong. Independent or not, the shadow was still a part of him. It was a manifestation of his aspect ability. So instead of asking the shadow, he really should have been asking himself, Not going to talk, are you? Sonny closed his eyes and directed his perception within, exploring himself for the first time since returning to the real world. He felt the beating of his heart, the steady rising of his chest, the slight chill of the shower room. He heard droplets of water falling on the tiled floor, felt the movement of filtered air against his skin, and there, on the verge of his consciousness, something new, a completely new sense. Sonny concentrated on it, and suddenly a whole other world opened to him. It was hard to describe with words, just like one would have trouble explaining how hearing or touch feels. It was as though he could communicate with vast forms that crowded around him and receive an understanding of both their own shape and the surrounding space, guided by the different degrees of pressure they exerted on his mind and each other. That understanding came naturally and instantaneously, like an instinct. These forms were shadows, and among them one, not the largest one but the deepest, didn't feel like an external entity. It was like a part of his soul. Once Sonny grasped the feeling of it, he could sense the shadow just like he sensed his limbs. The only thing was that his limbs were made out of flesh, and the shadow was made from the absence of light. Sonny opened his eyes and looked at the shadow. Then, with a thought, he willed it to raise an arm. The shadow raised an arm. He willed it to sit, stand, turn around, kick. Then he willed it to change shape, turning into a circle, then a line, then a monster, and finally back to his own silhouette. The shadow was mercurial and fluid, like water. The only constant was its size. Ha! How about that? The shadow pouted, then reluctantly raised its thumbs. But how are you useful? He willed the shadow to strike the towel rack. It obediently moved and delivered a powerful kick. Of course, since it was just a shadow, its leg passed over the towels harmlessly, not even causing them to sway a little. Is that all you can do? In his mind, the image of shadow tentacles tearing the mighty tyrant into little pieces cracked and shattered mercilessly. It seemed he would not be competing with Shadow God any time soon. How regretful. The shadow looked at him with disdain. Then it shrugged and stopped moving altogether, clearly offended. Sonny sighed and took a towel off the rack. All right, I will explore it later. A few minutes after that, he was wearing a clean police-issued tracksuit and heading for the cafeteria. Master Jet was waiting for him at one of the tables, with 2 trays full of steaming synthetic food in front of her. Help yourself. Sonny glanced at the cheap gruel, which was not so different from the stuff he used to consume in the outskirts, and sighed. Somehow he had expected his first meal after becoming a sleeper to be more lavish. Still, it was food. He sat down and began to wolf down the gruel ravenously. He was very, very hungry. In the process, his thoughts began to wander. Sonny stole a glance at Jet and wondered. The spell told him to find a master, and the next thing he knew, there was a woman calling herself Master right in front of him. He tried to imagine being an obedient slave to someone like her. Weird thoughts started to appear in his mind. You know what, Sonny, he thought with dark irony. Knowing your luck, this would be a perfect moment for her to ask, "What are you thinking about?" Sonny choked on the gruel. He felt his mouth beginning to open and put all of his will into staying silent. A second passed without him saying anything. Then a weird pressure appeared in his mind, which soon turned into blinding pain. He endured it for a couple more seconds before giving up. "I was thinking that it would be a perfect moment for you to ask me about what I am thinking," he finally said. Jet gave him a weird look. "All right, are you almost finished with your food?" Sonny nodded. "Then I'll begin. As per protocol, I am obligated to inform you of a few things. It is mostly a formality. First of all, concerning your nightmare." She glanced at him and sighed. "You are entitled to receive free psychological counseling. No matter what traumatic experience you have encountered, there is no shame in asking for help. Your mind is as important as your body. It's only right to keep it healthy. Are you interested?" Sonny shook his head. Jet shrugged and continued, "As you wish. You can also talk to me." Was it very hard? How could he answer? It was simultaneously much worse than I expected, and exactly as bad as I expected. She nodded, satisfied with that explanation. "That's a good attitude. I won't pry any further. Us outskirt rats are way more resilient than people think." Sonny looked at her in surprise. "Master Jet, you grew up in the outskirts?" She grinned. "What? You can't tell because of my exquisite manners and polished exterior?" He blinked a couple of times, surprised. "I couldn't tell at all." After thinking for a while, he added, "Are there a lot of people like us among the awakened?" Jet's smile disappeared. "No, there's not. In fact, they can be counted on one hand." As expected, odds were really stacked against people like them. That made the 3 stars on Jet's insignia even more exceptional. One day I'll be a master too. If she can do it, why can't I? So, what happens now? What else are you obligated to tell me? Sonny had no idea what he was supposed to do after leaving the police station. The winter solstice was just several weeks away. Jet leaned back and answered, "That's basically it. There are some additional hoops to jump through, mostly having to do with your family, but, well, I've read your file, so I know it doesn't apply. The only thing left is to decide how you will be preparing for your first journey into the dream realm." She looked at her communicator and grimaced. "I must stay. Your luck is exceptionally bad. There's not a lot of time at all. First of all, you are free to do what you want. No one is forcing you to make a certain decision. That is to say, you can choose to prepare on your own, or not prepare at all. Party until the lights go out." Sonny was not very well versed in partying. However, I would advise against that. As a sleeper, you are also entitled to enroll in the Awakened Academy. You'll be provided with food, lodging, and a wide choice of preparatory classes. This late into the year, you won't be able to learn a lot, but it's better than nothing. She was silent for a few seconds, then added, "More importantly, you will get acquainted with most of the people who will enter the dream realm with you. Some of them might become your companions for life. And some may end up trying to end that life once we're inside the spell," Sonny added, reading between the lines of what Master Jet had said. "So, what do you say? Do you want me to take you to the academy?" Sonny thought about it. Strangely, his flaw was silent, not forcing him to answer one way or the other. "Is it because I haven't made up my mind yet?" Finally, he looked down at his empty tray and made a decision. "Free lodging and food, you say?" "Yeah, I want to go to the academy." Chapter 19, Crossing the Bridge. Sonny was standing in front of the massive, seemingly indestructible, red gates of the Awakened Academy. The academy was, in fact, a city within the city. It was built like a fortress, with a high wall made of hard alloy, deep moat, and numerous large-caliber turrets, which were placed in certain positions to create a deadly air suppression dome. No nightmare creature, not even colossal titans, were supposed to be able to break through its defenses. It was a legendary place. Actually, many of the most popular webtoons, youth dramas, and novels took place right behind that wall. Adventures, rivalries, and romantic entanglements of the young awakened heroes were the mainstream theme of modern entertainment. Never in his wildest dreams did Sonny imagine actually becoming one of these heroes. Of course, how things really were differed a lot from how it was portrayed in the media. More than that, he had only 4 weeks to spend here before venturing into the dream realm. Even if he wanted to, there was not enough time for any type of entanglement, and he definitely did not want to. He had to learn how to survive, not waste time on such nonsense. The snow was slowly falling to the ground. It was cold and silent in front of the academy gates. Except for Sonny, there was only one other person, another new sleeper, if he had to guess. It was a tall, slender girl of around his age, with clear gray eyes and a detached look on her face. She had strange, silver-white hair that was cut short and neatly parted to the side. Just like him, she was dressed in a police-issued tracksuit and had no personal belongings with her. On her head there was a pair of old-fashioned headphones. She was calmly listening to music while they waited. There was a certain vibe to the silver-haired girl. It was sort of as though she was apart from the world. She looked confident and self-sufficient, but also a bit lonely. Sonny wasn't going to start a conversation. Who knew what kind of situation he would put himself in due to that damn flaw? It was better to keep to himself. He glanced at the girl and sighed. Read novel full.me. I wonder what flaw does she have? Finally, the gates began to open. The giant, ridiculously thick sheet of reinforced metal slowly descended, creating a long bridge. Sonny looked ahead with grim determination. Master Jet's parting words echoed in his mind. On their drive to the academy, Sonny didn't speak much, looking at the sights of the city that were flying past the window of Jet's personal transport vehicle. Actually, it was his first time sitting in a PTV. Most people in the city couldn't even dream about getting a license and purchasing a vehicle like that, having to do with public transportation. He had ridden in the back of a police cruiser once or twice, but that was a completely different experience. At some point, Master Jet looked at him and said, "Since we both come from the outskirts, I'll give you 3 pieces of advice. Whether you listen to me or not is your business." Sonny turned his head, waiting. First, once you're registered in the academy, they'll offer you psychological counseling again. There will also be a valuable reward for sharing your experiences in the nightmare and the details of your appraisal. You'll be able to receive a soul shard, maybe even several of them. He frowned. Are you trying to convince me to visit a psychiatrist again? Jet shook her head. No, I'm telling you to refuse. Surprised, Sonny raised his eyebrows. Why? There was a pause before she answered. You're too green to understand, but out there in the dream realm, nightmare creatures are not the only danger. Once you grow powerful enough, humans will become an equal threat. The less they know about your aspect, the better. So that's how it is. The easiest way to defeat a powerful awakened is to use their flaw. That's why young fools in the academy are encouraged in various ways to share the details of their aspects. I'm not saying that the government will leak your information, but once 2 people know a secret, it's no longer a secret. And there's a lot of people working for the government. That made a lot of sense. Thank you, Master Jet. She gave him a nod. Second, there will be a lot of courses to choose from, all types of combat training, deep dives into nightmare creature categories and vulnerabilities, basics of various types of sorcery, artifact study, and so on. Sonny gulped. Actually, he was already agonizing about what weapon to train with. 4 weeks was not enough to master a weapon, but at least he would have a basic understanding of it. Disregard all of that. The only course you have time to attend is wilderness survival. He blinked. What? Jet glanced at him. It's different for city kids who learn all sorts of useful things in school and from their tutors. But we don't have that advantage, do we? What was the biggest threat to your life during the nightmare? Sonny thought about it. On the surface, the most dangerous thing he faced was the tyrant, followed by Hero, Oro of the Nine. But actually, what almost killed him in the end was the cold. Jet smiled. Smart. You only know how to survive in the city, but the dream realm is mostly made of wilderness. Do you know how to make a fire, how to procure food, how to find safe shelter? No. Fighting monsters is important, but it'll be useless if you die of hunger or exposure to the elements. Trust me, I've learned it the hard way. Sonny nodded, angry at himself. It was so obvious, yet he never even thought about these seemingly simple things. He was blinded by his past habits and experience. Human brains were like that. Once accustomed to a certain way of living, it was hard to see past the already familiar routines. It was lazy thinking at its worst. At that point, Master Jet had stopped the car and opened the door, getting out. Sonny followed her and was momentarily stunned, staring at the colossal metal gates in front of them. This was the famous Awakened Academy. After a few seconds, he shook off his amazement and turned to his senior. This is as far as I go, she said, looking cheerlessly at the walls of the academy. I've already notified them. Someone will come fetch you in a while. There was something dark in the depths of her icy blue eyes. Sonny suddenly felt a cold feeling spreading through his body. What's the third advice? Master Jet glanced at him, then sighed. Remember, no one can survive in the dream realm alone. That's not an opinion, that's a fact. Try to get along with your peers, even if they don't treat you well. It might save your life. Then she suddenly smiled and patted him on the shoulder. You've done well to survive until now. Make sure to keep yourself alive in the future, too. Then she got back into her PTV and drove off. Just like that, she was gone. The end of the metal bridge hit the special grooves in the ground and stopped moving after a set of loud clicks. Sonny looked ahead, wondering what kind of life he was going to be living in the next 4 weeks. Keep your flaw and aspect secret. Learn to survive in the wilderness. Be nice to other sleepers. It didn't sound too hard, but for some reason, he was sure that these weeks were going to be as challenging as his first nightmare. Or maybe even worse. Seemingly free of such concerns, the silver-haired girl walked forward and stepped on the bridge. Sonny sighed and reluctantly followed. Chapter 20. Outcast once again. The sleeper part of the compound was relatively small and situated in the southern part of the academy, surrounded on all sides by training fields and parks. It was a low, modern building constructed with reinforced materials. Like the majority of buildings in the academy, most of it was hidden below the ground, leaving only a couple of floors above it. With its white, pristine alloy walls and wide windows, it must have looked beautiful in the summer, contrasted against all the greenery around. Inside, the building was spacious and well lit. Sonny and the silver-haired girl were taken to a large hall where 100 or so of young men and women, sleepers of the same unfortunate timing as the two of them, were already waiting for the beginning of the induction ceremony. Most of them were nervous, tense, and excited. Logistics of the academy were a constant headache for the administrators, since the rate at which the spell infected people was always chaotic. There was no way to orderly structure for batches of sleepers to undergo any type of standardized education on a shared schedule. Some of them had a full year to prepare for the dream realm, some only months, some even mere days. That's why these induction ceremonies were held each month at the beginning of the year, and then every week once the winter solstice began to loom near. Some of the sleepers in the hall had to wait days to be inducted, while Sunny had lucked out and was delivered to the academy just hours before the scheduled event. Once inside the hall, he understood two things. Firstly, everyone was well dressed and in possession of a suitcase, a duffel bag, or at least a backpack carrying their personal belongings. They were obviously coming prepared, most likely from home, sent off by their families. So Sunny and the silver-haired girl, who came empty-handed and wearing simple police-issued clothes, were not a norm like he had assumed, but actually an eye-catching anomaly. Right, that makes sense. Secondly, Master Jet was not being overly humble when she called herself below average by awakened standards. Even though these young people were just starting their paths as awakened, their looks were dazzling. Everyone was handsome, beautiful, and radiated health. He swallowed. Still, I feel like none of them compare. She might not be as perfectly shaped, but I don't know. She has a presence. It's like shadows become deeper and the temperature drops by a couple of degrees when she's in a room. Was this the difference between a sleeper and a master? But all of these thoughts were just him trying to postpone the inevitable. Sunny already knew that he was in for a wild ride, because he could not lie, and all of these excited youths, regardless of their clothes, gender, and looks, wanted to do one thing: talk. Every one of them wanted to talk with fellow sleepers. They wanted to discuss their nightmares, their future journey into the dream realm, and everything in between. They wanted to ask questions. They wanted to be asked questions. They wanted to discuss something important or just chit-chat about stupid things. Everyone wanted to share. "It's a nightmare," Sunny moaned, disturbed and fearful. "I'm doomed." Then, with a bit of grim determination, he gritted his teeth and slowly exhaled. "Just think about it as a continuation of your trial. You survived the Black Mountain, so you can survive this too." He had faced heroes, villains, monsters, and even gods. Was he going to be afraid of a bunch of teenagers? He might have underestimated how scary teenagers can be. In half an hour, pretty much everyone in the room hated his guts. After a short series of conversations, Sunny had acquired a reputation of an obnoxious, foul-mouthed pervert. This reputation was quickly solidified. He was slapped a few times and even punched once. He also discovered a couple of new things about his true self, namely, that deep down inside he was apparently rude, arrogant, and more than a little bit lustful. The conversations went something like this: "Look at all these young people. How many do you think will return from the dream realm? How many will perish? What do you think our own chances of survival are? I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that a pompous fool like you will die first." Or, "I even received an armor-type memory in my nightmare. It's an enchanted robe. Would you like to see? Actually, I would prefer to see you without a robe." Or, "Then those lowlifes began to rob the bodies. It was disgusting. They even took their shoes. What kind of degenerate would take a dead man's shoes? I once killed a man and took his boots. They were nice boots." "What? You killed someone just for a pair of boots?" "Of course not. There were other reasons. I also took his cloak." Once again an outcast, Sunny was eventually left alone. People seemed to be avoiding him. Unperturbed, he found a quiet corner and stood there, glad that no one wanted to talk to him anymore. His face hurt, and there was blood dripping from his nose. Being ostracized from a group was nothing new, but it still stung. However, he was smiling. Because in the process of turning the whole batch of sleepers against himself, Sunny had discovered something vital. He learned how to control his flaw. Once asked a question, he could not keep quiet. He also couldn't lie. However, after a lot of experimentation, Sunny had found out that with a bit of practice, he could influence the exact way the truth eventually came out. It was like this. After receiving a question, his mind automatically produced a truthful answer. After that, the flaw would force him to say that answer aloud. Refusal to speak would result in the buildup of pressure, then piercing pain. The longer he kept quiet, the worse the pain would become. Eventually, he would have to surrender and reveal the truth. However, in these moments between receiving the question and surrendering to the pain, the actual wording of the answer could be changed. The more it strayed from the initial thought, the more resistance he would meet. Once again, in the form of pressure, then pain. It still had to be truthful, but it didn't have to be so stark. For example, if Master Jet were to catch him staring again and ask what he was looking at, instead of embarrassing himself, Sonny would have been able to endure a bit of pain and simply say, "You." That would still be the truth, however. The result would be entirely different. Hidden in the corner, Sonny grinned as he observed the sleepers. "This is good. This is great. This is something I can work with." After all, one didn't have to lie to deceive a person. Sometimes truth was the best material for creating deceit. If used with a certain devious type of intelligence, truth could be as misleading as lies. For example, in one of his previous conversations, Sonny had confessed that he had once stolen boots from a dead man. The other guy was horrified and asked if he had really killed someone just for a pair of boots. The answer the flaw forced him to give was that there were other reasons, and that he had also taken the man's cloak. The true reason for killing the veteran slaver was that he had whipped Sonny a few hours prior. Besides, he was already dying. The cloak had nothing to do with the killing itself. However, the wording of the answer created an impression that it did. Thus, two truthful statements, when put together, created an effect akin to a lie. This was just a simple example. With a lot of effort and intense thinking, Sonny could create other types of manipulative truths. It was going to be extremely difficult and risky, but it could be done. He just needed a bit of luck. It was time to put his theory to practice. Sonny didn't forget what his main goal was: to make sure that no one ever finds out his true name. To achieve that, he had to create an impression that he was the most pathetic, weak person in this whole building. Someone who would never receive a positive appraisal, let alone a divine aspect and a true name. However, since this would be a lie, he couldn't just go and say it. So how was he to convince everyone that he definitely did not have a powerful aspect and an impressive record with the spell? His eyes fell on a particular group of sleepers. There were 5 or 6 of them, gathered around a tall, confident young man. The young man had brown hair and a gentle, handsome face. His eyes were green, with a hint of friendly humor. His posture, figure, and attentive gaze betrayed someone who went through extensive training. Everything about the young man screamed of nobility and strength. Just at that moment, one of his companions was saying with a tone of amazement, "Ascended? You have received an ascended aspect. What? What was your appraisal?" The young man smiled humbly. "Oh, it was excellent." Sonny stopped in front of the group as though by accident. After hearing the young man's answer, he frowned and looked at him with disdain. Then, with a voice full of utter bewilderment, Sonny said, "Ascended, excellent. That's it? What's the big deal?" Chapter 21. First Performance. His words hung in silence. The sleepers looked at Sonny with a hilarious assortment of emotions, ranging from bewilderment to shock. The young man with humorous eyes just smiled politely. To be honest, getting an ascended aspect during the first nightmare was extremely rare. He was certainly someone special, maybe even outstanding. Actually, despite their apparent differences, the young man somehow reminded Sonny of Hero, Oro of the Nine. There was a special type of calculating coldness hidden deep inside their eyes. He had encountered such people before, mostly among the veterans of various street gangs in the outskirts. They simply called this type of coldness murder math. Basically, it was a habit experienced fighters developed. No matter where they were and what mood they were in, there was always a sober part of their minds constantly calculating the most efficient way of killing the person in front of them, just in case such need arises. Ugh, why do I have to antagonize someone like that of all people? But Sonny really had no grounds to complain. After all, he brought this on himself. After a few seconds, one of the young man's companions finally blinked and said, Friend, you must not know a lot about the spell. Castor's results are truly remarkable." Then, with a furtive glance at the remarkable Castor, he added, "He is a legacy, after all. An actual living and breathing descendant of an awakened clan." Sonny reevaluated his opinion of the humorous young man. Legacies were known to be trained for their eventual entrance into the spell from the moment they could walk. For them, being infected was a certainty instead of a possibility. They were extremely formidable people. "Just great," he thought bitterly and made his frown deepen. "Are you trying to pull a prank on me? You call this remarkable?" The bewilderment in the eyes of these sleepers was slowly being replaced by hostility. "Listen, friend, if you don't think that an ascended aspect is remarkable, then please share with us your own amazing results. What, pray tell, was your appraisal?" Castor himself was still keeping quiet and smiling. However, his defenders were growing restless. This was exactly what Sonny wanted to happen. He smiled with utter contempt. "I would let you know. My appraisal was, it was glorious. Yes, glorious. And the aspect I acquired was of the divine rank." After that, he received a number of strange looks. No one had ever received a divine aspect before, so, of course, they were starting to think that he was a lunatic. But there was still a sliver of doubt. Maybe that strange guy was a descendant of a powerful clan, a peerless prodigy. Maybe his appraisal was, indeed, glorious. Sonny had to dispel that tiny bit of doubt. "Mind you, I'm not some lofty legacy. Pfft, I'm from the outskirts. I've never even received combat training. All that training and he only got an excellent? What did he do during the nightmare? Pick his nose the whole time?" The expressions of all the sleepers that were listening to his bragging instantly changed. An outskirt rat with no training. Yeah, sure. Who was he trying to fool? Finally, with the same polite smile, Castor spoke. "Glorious. That is interesting. Would you mind telling us what were your achievements in the nightmare?" Sonny grinned. "Sure, no problem. First of all, I killed an awakened tyrant." Every cost him a couple of moments of intense pain, but he didn't let it show on his face. His expression was nothing but smug and confrontational. The mere mention of a tyrant, let alone an awakened one, made a couple of sleepers smile with ridicule. "Oh, really? How did you kill it?" An arrogant look appeared on Sonny's face. "How? Let me tell you, I didn't even have to lift a finger. I just spat, and it was torn to pieces." Which was true. Sonny had spat a mouthful of blood on the altar, and as the result, Mountain King was ruthlessly dismembered by Shadow God. Someone openly laughed. "This guy is either insane or purposefully messing with us. Listen here, Shorty. Have some decency, okay? Who would believe such a lie?" Sonny was genuinely angry. He wanted to retort, saying that he wasn't short, but he couldn't. Because that would be a lie, damn it. So, instead, he just gritted his teeth and said with a voice full of outrage, "I can't answer that, because it's not a lie." "Are you really insisting that you had killed an awakened tyrant? A tyrant? And with a bit of spit, no less?" Sonny knitted his brows. "That's the truth." More laughter followed. "Crazy bastard. He actually believes in his own crap? Insane, he's insane." Unexpectedly, Castor stopped his companions. "Guys," after the laughter quieted down, he asked in a friendly manner, "what else did you achieve?" "What? That wasn't enough?" Sonny raised his chin. Let me think. Oh, I also killed an awakened swordsman. Really? How did you do that? Acting as though he was a little bit embarrassed, Sonny looked down. Actually, that time I had to lift a finger. I even had to shake it a couple of times. That was enough to kill him, though. He was holding the silver bell between his fingers, which led to Hero being attacked and eventually killed by the tyrant. So, technically, all his statements were true. What a crackpot! Ha! Can you believe this idiot? Poor bastard. Not only is he weak, he's also lost it. Castor gave his companions a long look and then turned to Sonny. Anything else? Sonny blinked. Time for the finishing touch. Something else? Well, oh, right. I communicated with a bunch of gods, even though they were all dead. I made one of them wake up. He gave me a blessing. I was blessed by a god, do you all understand? The sleepers were silently shaking their heads or looking at him with pity. Castor sighed. I see. Well, in comparison to your achievements, mine do look rather average. Thank you for sharing with us. I hope you'll be as successful once we enter the dream realm. Sonny smiled with a look of smug superiority on his face. You better believe it. With that, he turned around and walked away. Ah, that's a job well done. He was pretty sure that after this performance, no one would ever believe that he actually had some kind of a powerful aspect or did anything worthy of notice during the nightmare. He only told them the truth, and yet managed to make everyone believe in the opposite of the truth. Such an incredible feeling. What did they think of him now? They thought that he was weak, grew up without any education in the outskirts, and had no training. More than that, he was apparently either insane or incredibly stupid. His temper was terrible, truly pathetic and pitiful fellow. Now, whenever he was asked about his aspect, he could just honestly say that it was of the divine rank and be laughed at. People would rather believe that the spell had ceased to exist than that he was someone noteworthy. He could even scream about his accomplishments from the roof, and no one would believe him. Subsequently, no one would ever suspect that he had a true name. Just you wait, fools. One day I'll be the one laughing. As Sonny was walking away, he heard one of the sleepers talking to Castor. Why didn't you put that lunatic in his place? He has belittled you. After a short pause, Castor answered. His voice sounded low and mellow. Poor kid must have lost his mind in the nightmare. It often happens. He'll most likely die soon, so being kind is the least I can do. The corner of Sonny's mouth twitched. What a nice guy. He knew that Castor's words were based on a false assumption, but for some reason still felt a cold chill running up his spine. Chapter 22. Corpse Corner. Satisfied with his performance, Sonny walked back to the deserted corner of the hall. He felt people looking at him with mockery, contempt, and pity. No one seemed to be willing to stay close to him. It was just as well. He didn't want to be bothered anyway. Still, weren't their reactions a bit exaggerated? It's not like he was carrying an infectious disease. Well, except for the spell. But it wasn't really a disease, which everyone here should have known already. Finally, he extricated himself from the crowd and reached the corner. For some reason, sleepers were unwilling to approach it. Currently, there was only one girl sitting quietly on the bench. Sonny gave her a look. The quiet girl was delicate, demure, and very pretty. Her clothes were tidy and neat. They weren't very expensive, but still rather tasteful. With her pale blonde hair, big blue eyes, and exquisite face, she looked like a beautiful porcelain doll. She was subtly breathtaking. However, there was something wrong with her. Sonny frowned, trying to understand what exactly about the girl made him uncomfortable. After a while, he realized that her empty, expressionless stare was reminding him of Mountain King. Startled, Sonny understood that the girl was blind. It took him a couple of seconds to compose himself. What a shame! A bit disheartened, he carefully sat on the opposite end of the bench. The girl wouldn't have survived the first nightmare if she had been blind prior to entering the spell, which meant that she lost her sight as the result of the appraisal. It was her flaw. Suddenly, Sonny felt very apprehensive. A cold sensation spread through his chest, and I thought my flaw was bad. No matter what aspect ability the blind girl had received in exchange for her sight, it was effectively a death sentence. A blind person had no chances of surviving in the dream realm, at least not with a dormant core. In some sense, the girl was already dead. She was effectively a walking corpse. Feeling extremely disturbed, Sonny turned away and studied the crowd of sleepers. Now he understood why people were trying to avoid this corner. The girl was surrounded by an invisible but almost palpable aura of death. Sleepers usually weren't very superstitious, but anyone would feel uncomfortable in her company. Armed with this knowledge, Sonny suddenly saw a pattern in how the young people in the hall were grouped. Instinctively, they all tried to stand close to those of their own circumstance. At the far end of the hall, closest to the stage, were one or two small groups. People in these groups were distinct from the rest of sleepers. They were all confident, calm, and had an air of readiness. These were the legacies. They were trained for the spell since birth and had the highest chances of survival. Castor especially stood out from the rest. Next to them was a larger number of expensively dressed young people. They were lively and excited, and only a little nervous. They were the scions of rich and high-ranking citizens. Their training was pretty good since such families had ample funds to hire private tutors, even awakened ones. Their chances of survival weren't bad. Then there was the largest part of the crowd, which consisted of kids from middle-class families. They might not have had the privilege of training under awakened tutors, but their education wasn't bad. The government spent a lot of effort to put all the necessary knowledge and skills into the school curriculum, preparing potential sleepers in advance. Some of them might have received additional training in private. To survive, these sleepers would need to put in a valiant effort and also have a bit of luck. But it wasn't improbable. Consequently, they were tense and nervous. And lastly, there was Sonny and the blind girl, the corpses. From the point of view of other sleepers in the hall, their chances of survival were close to zero. How charming! This was how the young sleepers had subconsciously divided themselves. The only exception from this rule was the silver-haired girl, who stood alone and apart from everyone, seemingly indifferent to tension and nervousness that permeated the air. She was leaning against a wall with her eyes closed, still listening to music. But regardless of their group and level of training, everyone was already tired of waiting. When will the damn induction ceremony start? Sonny thought, irritated. As though answering his thoughts, a tall man in a dark blue uniform appeared on the stage. Not only was he tall, he was actually almost a giant. Sonny even wondered if the man's mother had sinned with a bear. Of course, it was impossible. Bears had gone extinct long before the spell even appeared. But he once saw pictures in a book, and they looked sort of similar. A bear-like nightmare creature, then. The giant man had wide shoulders, an athletic build, and a gorgeous brown beard. His eyes were calm and serious. After reaching the center of the stage, he gave sleepers a long look. When his gaze reached the deserted corner, Sonny suddenly felt nervous. I sure hope he doesn't have a telepathic ability. Otherwise, he might separate me from a limb or two on behalf of his mother. The man didn't pay Sonny a lot of attention and returned his gaze to the front rows of the crowd. Finally, he said in a deep, reverberating voice, "I am Awakened Rock. Sleepers, welcome to the Academy." Everyone listened without making a sound. In less than a month, you will be summoned to the dream realm. Some of you might think that you are well prepared. You're wrong. The spell is merciless and cunning. The moment awakened begin to think too much of themselves, they die. I've seen countless sleepers like you lose their lives. I've also seen experienced masters lose theirs. Even saints are not assured to survive. Thanks for the encouragement, Sonny thought sarcastically. In the following 4 weeks, we will do everything in our power to increase your chances of survival. You will receive training from the best instructors in the world. However, don't be misled by their fame. In the end, whether you return from the dream realm alive depends only on one person. You. The responsibility to survive is yours, and yours alone. Except for the legacies, sleepers were looking at each other with growing fear in their eyes. Awakened Rock continued, "You are not children anymore. It's a shame because you ought to be. But the spell has decided otherwise. You have been to the first nightmare, so you already know what it's like. Your parents, your teachers, and your friends can't help you anymore. Haven't had any of those in a long time." While listening to Rock's speech, Sonny couldn't help but feel a little excluded. It was all old news to him. However, he understood the instructor's purpose. He had to make young sleepers afraid, because fear was the only thing that would keep them alive. Finally, the speech got to the important part. Awakened Rock paused, giving kids listening to him a few moments to digest his words. Then, with a short nod, he continued, "Now we will talk about the difference between nightmares and the dream realm." Chapter 23. Dreams and Nightmares. That was something Sonny was keenly interested in. Of course, he had a general knowledge of how things were set inside the spell. But the first nightmare had already shown him that reality was different from how it was portrayed in popular culture, in a number of small but infinitely important ways. He needed to separate truth from the myths. And of course, it was very advantageous to hear it from the mouth of someone who had actually been to the dream realm. So Sonny was all ears. Awakened Rock began to speak. "Most people are aware of what nightmares are, because they have an impact on the real world and their lives. All of you have been warned before entering the first nightmare that, should you perish there, a nightmare creature would be allowed to cross the threshold and enter reality." Yup, that was the reason why Master Jet had to wait patiently by his side, prepared to deal with the monster if it appears. First nightmares are unique, because each of them is individual. That's why only a single creature can appear. However, starting from the second nightmare, things become much more dangerous. These nightmares are not tied to an infected person. Instead, they are born in the dream realm. While the seed of the nightmare is growing, any number of awakened can attempt to conquer it. Hunting down nightmares was the main responsibility of the awakened. Sonny knew that much. Should they all die or fail to find the seed before it matures, a gate will open in the real world, letting through countless monsters. You all know the consequences. Other awakened will be forced to withstand the onslaught on this side, but then there can be massive destruction or losses among the civilian population. Opening gates were something that every person on the planet feared. It was also the second disaster brought upon by the spell after the initial appearance of the nightmare creatures. The main difference was that, in that initial wave, there were only dormant beasts. However, gates had ranks of their own, and any type of creature could potentially step through. Not long before Sonny was born, a rank 5 gate opening left a whole continent uninhabitable. Luckily, high-rank gates were very rare. Awakened Rock's voice grew solemn. "So it is not wrong to say that the purpose of the awakened is to enter the dream realm, seek out maturing nightmares, and close them before any harm could befall the real world. From this, you can see that the dream realm and the nightmares are connected, but are not one and the same. If nightmares are the destination, then the dream realm is the road. But it is also so much more. Very romantic. Does Awakened Rock have poetic inclinations? Simply put, the dream realm is a world. It is vast, mysterious, and mostly unexplored. it is also dead. There is no life out there except for the nightmare creatures, corrupted ecosystems, and now us. But it wasn't always dead. We can tell that once, a long time ago, the Dream Realm was home to several primitive civilizations. There are a lot of ruins buried in its soil. From what Sunny knew, those lost civilizations were not really primitive. It's just that their development was centered around soul cores and mysticism, as opposed to technology. So, basically, miracles and magic. What were their names? How did they fall? No one knew. Maybe they were destroyed by the spell. We don't know if the Dream Realm exists inside the spell as one of its illusions, just on an unimaginably larger scale, or if it's real, with the spell only serving as a pathway between two realities. However, we do suspect that the illusions conjured up inside the nightmares are based on its history. They are replicas of past events, somehow reconstructed from the depths of time. So there might have been a real slave caravan on that black mountain once, a long time ago. Sunny remembered how time seemed to move in reverse at the beginning of his nightmare. He thought about how things would have ended up without his involvement. Did the nameless temple slave perish in Mountain King's maw with the rest of the caravan? Somehow he felt that the nameless slave was not that simple. Otherwise, why would the spell remember him? And what about Hero? Was he able to escape? I wonder. There are 4 main differences between the Dream Realm and the nightmares. Firstly, it doesn't have a story. There is no predetermined conflict you are forced to resolve. You can move freely and explore, provided that you have the strength to stay alive in the wilderness. Most people tend to stay close to one of the human citadels. That's good to know, Sunny thought, unconvinced. Sure, there were no predetermined conflicts in the Dream Realm, but with his fated attribute, he was pretty certain to end up in some kind of trouble. So, that freedom Awakened Rock had mentioned was relative in his case. Meanwhile, the instructor continued. Secondly, as I have already mentioned, there are no people in the Dream Realm except for those who came from the real world. There are only monsters. Some of them can mimic human appearance, though, so be mindful of that. Sunny felt cold sweat running down his back. Nightmare creatures mimicking humans? So creepy. Since when was that a thing? Why hasn't he ever heard about it? He stole a glance at the legacies standing in the first row and noticed that they did not show any sign of surprise. So they knew. Thirdly, unlike the first nightmare, no nightmare creatures will appear in the real world if you die in the Dream Realm. It may sound cruel, but that's a good thing. Awakened forces are already spread thin. If we had to monitor every sleeper, we wouldn't have resources to handle more important matters. Considering that each sleeper could spend weeks, sometimes even months, in the Dream Realm, there was ruthless logic in that statement. And lastly, and most importantly, unlike nightmares, which are bound by the rules of fairness, there is no limit to what kind of creature you can meet in the Dream Realm. During its trials, the spell won't pit a dormant human against an opponent many ranks above them. Oh, really? Sunny sneered. However, he was forced to agree with Awakened Rock. Even though both Hero and Mountain King were way out of his league, they were still just 1 rank above him. But in the Dream Realm, no such restrictions exist. Theoretically, you can stumble upon an unholy titan and die before even realizing what happened. So be careful and stick to the regions with enemies on par with your own rank. It's not an ironclad guarantee, but at least there will be less of a chance of you biting off more than you can chew. Sticking to a region populated by nightmare creatures below his rank was even better. That was exactly what Sunny was planning to do. Awakened Rock paused for a few moments, studying the faces of sleepers in front of him. Then he added, "When the solstice comes, you will be drawn into the Dream Realm. The exact location of where you will appear can't be predicted in advance, but there is a high chance that many of you will find yourselves in close proximity to each other. Band together and proceed to the nearest human citadel. Each citadel is built around a gateway. Once you reach it, you will be able to return. Gateways were special portals that served as exit points from the dream realm. Once sleepers reached such a portal, they would be able to escape back to reality and become awakened. Their core would evolve, and they would also receive a second aspect ability. After that, they would return to the dream realm each time they fall asleep. If you can't locate or are unable to reach the nearest human citadel, search for an unclaimed gateway. It will usually be inside or near the most prominent landmark of the region. Work together to defeat its guardians and come back alive. He gave them a heavy look. That is all for today. Next, follow the instructions sent to your communicators to find your assigned dormitory. Once settled, you may proceed to the cafeteria for some late supper. There will be a round of interviews after that to prepare your suggested curriculums. Get a good night's rest. Your training starts tomorrow. With that, he gave them a short nod and left. Sunny sighed. Can't be predicted in advance, huh? With his luck, he would either drop right in the middle of a prosperous human citadel and immediately roll into a gateway, or appear in some region of the dream realm, so remote and deadly that no one had ever heard about it or returned from it alive. Let's hope for the former. Since he couldn't do anything about it, Sunny wasn't very worried. There was something much more important on his mind. What exactly do they serve here for supper?